Alright, let's see if this works. Finally, we're back to our old standby. Just doing Twitch this time. Um, who knows if we will have any viewers this time, as this is much later. I do apologize. I did a full stream earlier, and the software bugged out. So, we're going to once again do Thermopylae. I think that's all I have tonight. If you've already seen my stream on Thermopylae, then go ahead and skip it. If you're in my class, you will be reenacting this tomorrow, and so you better rest up for tomorrow morning. You will breakfast in Hades. So, here we are at the Hot Gates. I take our ritual sacrifice. Sing, goddess of the glory of the Spartans and the other gods. And by gods, I mean Greeks. At the Hot Gates of Thermopylae, and do take this as my sacrifice. We throw the gizzards to the gods, and we barbecue the rest for our good Spartan warriors. So, here we are at the Hot Gates. This is the way that the Greeks would have come from, coming north from Hellas. Here we go. So, Leonidas and his 300 Spartans start here in Laconia, in Sparta. It is set during the Carnea, an important Spartan festival, and thus this was not a time that the Spartan government or the religious leaders would have allowed for a normal declaration of war. You cannot march an army out. But the Spartans had received a Delphic message, an oracle, that said either a Spartan king would fall, or Sparta itself would be ravaged. And if Sparta is being ravaged down here in the bottom of the Peloponnese, then Xerxes and his Persian troops have conquered all of Greece at that point. So Leonidas takes it upon himself to recruit 300 Spartans. That's the number of his bodyguard. And he marches northwards to block the pass of Thermopylae. Now, he has 300 men in his bodyguard. Normally, he selects a specific 300 men who all have living descendants, because this is going to be a suicide mission. He marches north through Arcadia, picking up allies, and in Boeotia, he marches past Thebes. Thebes is thought to be Medizing, or potentially turning on the Greek force and betraying them to the Persians, and so he grabs 1,000 of them. However, it's likely that the leaders of Boeotia said, oh, what a great opportunity to sacrifice our political rivals, and sends the loyalists with Leonidas to Thermopylae, while the Medizers stay in Boeotia. And we will see what happens as Xerxes makes his way through Thebes. So, the Spartans and their allies, the Thespians, the Arcadians, the Phocians. The Phocians are people from this local area, and the Thebans, along with their Helot slaves, all march up here. Xerxes has marched through Thrace and Macedonia, which are bound to him. Both of them have given him earth and water before this invasion, which means they have kneeled. They recognize Xerxes as their sovereign, and he's marching his massive army, drinking the rivers dry and bankrupting every place he goes through just with a single meal for his massive following of soldiers. So he probably has around 250,000 men, modern estimate. It's likely in the hundreds of thousands. Herodotus gives us the number 5 million men, 1,200 ships, and 240,000 sailors. That's unlikely. The Greeks were initially going to hold up here north in a place in Thessaly called the Vale of Tempe. This is one of several mountain passes near Mount Olympus. When it was discovered that there are, in fact, multiple mountain passes, the Greeks were like, nah, way, we're getting out of here. They had sent 10,000 troops under Themistocles and others, Themistocles being the Athenian general, and they were going to block the pass there, block the Persians, do what they did at Thermopylae, but it turned out to not be the only choke point. Here, though, around the Gulf of Melis, the Malian Gulf, Thermopylae is the only pass on this side of the mountains. Mount Calidrimus is here, Mount Parnassus is right above Delphi over here, and the Persians would have had to go far out of their way this way. So Thermopylae was the place chosen to stop up the Persian invasion. So, as Xerxes is preparing, his advisor Artabanus is the foil to Xerxes, and he's the one bringing up critical ideas against this invasion, saying you are going to face problems. Xerxes is portrayed by Herodotus as overconfident. He is assembling the largest army Europe has ever seen and will ever see for a number of, maybe up to 2,000 years. Um, and he knows he's going to win. He's demonstrating all of the classic signs of hubris. When the Hellespont has a storm that destroys his ships, he brands and lashes and whips the river, or the sea, insults it. You are a briny river, essentially, and has manacles dropped into the water to enslave the Hellespont, which is the sign of a jealous and vengeful god if I've ever heard of one. And Artabanus says, you have two main enemies to fear, and they are not the Athenians and they are not the Spartans. It is the land and the sea. And so as we look over the Malian Gulf, we can see this large beach, which, if we compare it to this trireme, and we think that Xerxes had hundreds of these ships, you can see that this beach is not nearly enough to dock all several hundred, probably around 600 ships in the Persian fleet. And so when the fleet is struck not by one but two storms around this time, hundreds of ships are bashed against the rocks, against these stony cliffs of the Malian Gulf, and tens of thousands of sailors and marines are killed. Over here, between the Malian Gulf and Euboea, a Greek fleet holds the pass of Artemision. In reality, the Malian Gulf and this area here come much closer to the northern tip of Artemision. So actually, that's where Artemision is, right there, Artemision Point. And the battle would have taken place here. It's a similar thing to the stoppage at Thermopylae. You have a small force holding a narrow choke point. So Artabanus says the ocean is going to be a significant enemy because there will not be enough bays or protected areas for your entire fleet to dock safely, and they're going to be moored out on the ocean, and should anything happen, like a Hellesponter, you will lose significant numbers of men. Next was the land. The land is not the wide, flat plains of Central Asia that the Persian cavalry is so used to and has been able to conquer the world on. Instead, it's going to be the mountainous, wooded highlands of the Greek mainland, and that is going to cause a significant problem to such numbers as you have.
The Persian king Darius's cries of rage echoed for years after his humiliating defeat at Marathon. Even after Darius's death, his son Xerxes continued to seek vengeance against the Greeks. According to Aeschylus, Asia was emptied of all its men. Greek spies brought the news of Xerxes' imminent invasion back to their homeland. Afterwards, many discussions were had on the best place to mount a defense. In the end, the Greeks decided on Thermopylae. The area featured a narrow pass that could act as a bottleneck for the Persian army, negating their numerical superiority. It also offered naval advantages, offering the Greek fleets opportunities for flanking. 5,000 Peloponnesian Greeks set up at a fort near the entrance of the narrow passage, otherwise known as the Hot Gates. Leading them was Leonidas, a Spartan king who prided himself on supposedly being a direct descendant of Heracles. Leonidas was accompanied by several elite soldiers who together made up the famous 300 Spartans.
So here's a classic neoclassical painting. Jacques-Louis David. He's made a lot of other cool French paintings. Here is Leonidas at the Battle of Marathon wearing many fewer clothes than they probably actually wore, right? We've got, once again, it drives me crazy. I've yet to see a really good reinterpretation of phalanx combat. Everyone who tries to do it and they don't even try. They just do something fancy. The Battle of Marathon during the first Persian invasion of Greece taught the Greeks that they were stronger when united. With Xerxes' force fast approaching, many cities gathered in Corinth, where they decided for the first time in their history to unite and form a common army. So the Battle of Marathon was directed specifically against Athens. Athens had sent a fleet to burn down one of the Persian capitals, the capital city of Sardis in Lydia, in western Anatolia, or modern-day Turkey. So, in revenge, a large fleet was sent against Athens, and at the Battle of Marathon, a much superior, at least in numbers, Persian force was defeated by the Athenians and their Plataean allies. So, uh, Xerxes is going to finish the job of his father Darius, and they meet here in Corinth, a major mercantile city, at what is known as the Pan-Hellenion. Pan, all, Hellenion, referring to the Hellenes, or the way that the Greeks referred to themselves. Thermopylae, as you can see up ahead in the distance, right, we have these hot springs. Thermopylae means hot gates. Thermo, hot, pyle is the plural of gates, and we have all these hot springs. It was actually a bit of a resort for Greeks at this time.
The Persian army arrived in the summer of 480 BCE, preceded by a flood of rumors regarding their strength and numbers. It was claimed they consumed 6,000 tons of wheat every day, and that they dried every river and brook they passed to quench their near insatiable thirst. During their march to Thermopylae, the Persians faced no opposition, and in fact increased their numbers further by recruiting more soldiers from other Greek cities and places like Thrace. According to Herodotus, the last count of the Persian fleet was numbered at 1,207 boats, mounted by approximately 240,000 men. He estimates the land army, meanwhile, was made up of more than 1 million men. The Greek forces at Thermopylae were heavily outnumbered.
So as the Persian force made its way towards Europe, they passed through Thrace, which is the opposite side of Turkey, Macedon, and Thessaly to the north. Thessaly is this area over here. It's not actually mountainous, it's actually quite open. They have a lot of cavalry, much more than mainland Greece. And all of these places are perfect areas for the Persian army to come in like a storm. And they well, they don't even face opposition. All these places supplicate, they give them earth and water, they give them the troops that the Persian king wants, they feed them, and because of this, the Phocians and the Thessalians have been at war for a very long time. There's actually one really cool story of the Thessalians are riding their cavalry in, and the Phocians have dug this large trench and they filled it with empty wine jugs. So as the horses gallop over, they crash through the earth and into these shattering wine jugs, and the horses become lamed, and the Phocians win the battle. So the Thessalians are leading some of the Persian army through this area and into focus, as we will see. So all of these places have what is known as Medized. Let's actually check this out. So as we see here, this is a 150-year-old photo of Thermopylae, but the sea has receded about 2.5 miles. So if you look on Google Maps to try to see what Thermopylae looks like today, you're going to be very disappointed. According to Herodotus, the main weaknesses of the Persian army were that they lacked superior defensive equipment and were not as well trained as the Greeks. Maybe. It seems mostly that it's actually that Herodotus makes a large argument for logistical difficulties, for that the sea and the land being inhospitable to the Persian army. But yeah, the fact that the Greeks were fighting for freedom is another point that Herodotus makes a lot of, as well as the fact that they are fully armored versus Persians who are wearing linen tunics, scale mail, other things that, and using spears that are shorter than the Greeks, that are going to set them at a significant disadvantage against a hoplite phalanx, especially a phalanx that is bounded by these walls. The Persians excelled at fighting on vast flat terrain, but were less effective in mountainous and wooded regions. The Greek strategist uses to their advantage to try to lure the Persians to fight on unfavorable terrain. So at this point, I'm going to zoom ahead, and I want you to see what the actual gates look like. So this is the staging ground, but not actually. You know what? Actually, I'm going to get on my horse. I'm going to skip this area. Let's see. Okay. Nope. Oh, shoot. I accidentally interacted
Xerxes
rather than
believed that at the
mounted my
sight of
horse.
his massive army, the Greeks at Thermopylae would flee in terror. Instead, they deliberated. The majority of the Peloponnesians wanted to engage the Persians on the Isthmus of Corinth. Leonidas, meanwhile, believed it was wiser to stay put in Thermopylae. While the Greek forces debated, a Persian horseman was sent to spy on the enemy. He returned to Xerxes with surprising news. Not only were the Greeks not fleeing, but the Spartans guarding the fort were exercising and combing their hair. A far cry from the fearful soldiers Xerxes expected. To increase the pressure on the Greeks, Xerxes waited 4 more days, then attacked on the 5th. The Persians faced heavy resistance and suffered many losses, and Herodotus says Xerxes leaped 3 times from his chair, seized with fear for his army. The following day proved to be just as difficult for the Persian forces, and the Greeks continued to stand their ground.
Alright, so let's just do this, and then I will show you the pass itself, which we rode through before, but there are some things I want to mention. Xerxes was the son of Darius, the king who ordered the first Persian invasion of Greece, an invasion that proved unsuccessful. So there were 3 Persian invasions. The first was under General Mardonius. They went along the north, and the fleet, as it rounded one of the peninsulae of the Chalkidiki, a massive storm destroyed it, and then the general was wounded grievously in a siege on the land, and they were like, okay, this is terrible, we gotta go back. The second one was what ended in the Battle of Marathon, where they swept across by boat. They burned down Naxos, they burned down, and they destroyed Chalkis on Eretria on Euboea, and then they landed on the beaches of Marathon and were defeated by the Athenians. And then the third one, we call it the second Persian invasion because it's the second one that actually made it to Greece. This is what we're dealing with right now. Xerxes, so Darius, after Marathon, he begins to assemble a larger, better army, and then he dies in 486. Xerxes becomes king in 486, and then after that, when he ascends, Egypt and Babylon, 2 very important and very wealthy Persian satrapies, rise in rebellion. Babylon by itself provides 1/3 of the income of the entire Persian Empire, and Egypt is the breadbasket that feeds many of these troops. So this is very important, and that army raised to attack Greece and conquer Europe is then brought to crush these revolts. So it's not until 481, 480 that Xerxes is able to mount this invasion. With his subjects now in line, Xerxes set out to invade Greece, presumably to avenge the humiliation of his father that his father had suffered at the hands of the Greeks. Alright, so, which way? So, the hot gates, you can see the hot springs. The hot gates are up ahead, and they are extraordinarily narrow. It is said that only 2 carts could pass by them side by side, and in the middle there was actually a Phocian wall. The Phocians are the local inhabitants here, and they had built a wall a long time before. It was crumbling at this time, and the Spartans and their allies rebuilt it. So in the middle, it was probably like 20 feet wide or less. It was extremely narrow. And so the shield wall of the hoplite phalanx, plus their longer spears and excellent discipline, allowed them to hold the gate for days at a time. So, as we saw, that Persian emissary rides up and takes a look at these guys, and they just let him come up. They're like, oh, the spy, whatever, he can see us. And the Spartans are oiling their hair, they're combing it, they're like massaging themselves, they're doing exercises, they're laughing, they're playing around, and this guy's like, what on earth is going on? Do they not see the 1,000 nations of the Persian Empire? Because at this time, this entire plain is covered by hundreds of thousands of men, thousands of campfires. They are the clouds of dust brought up by their marching obscures these mountains. They are drinking rivers dry. It is a sight to behold. Absolutely horrifying. Xerxes, as we saw, waited 4 days before he invaded, or before he sent his troops to attack them. And he was assuming that the Greeks would turn tail and run. How could they stand up to such a terrifying force? But instead, they held their ground. And then the emissary, an emissary comes before the army attacks and says, "Why are you guys defending yourselves here? We Persians are light-handed. We are benevolent masters. You are poor, and we will make you richer beyond your wildest imaginings. Leonidas, I will put you and the Spartans in charge of all Greece. You have helatized the Messenians. We can let you helatize all Greeks. All you need to do is bend your knee and give us earth and water, to give us supplication, to swear allegiance." And Leonidas said, "Yeah, there's no chance." He also has said to his allies that there's no chance that they will retreat from Thermopylae, that they must defend mainland Greece. He had come with many Peloponnesians, and the Peloponnesians wanted to do in the Gulf of Corinth here what they were proposing to do in Thermopylae. They wanted to cut off the Persian advance at this chokehold, and Leonidas said, "No, we must take this pass." So there was a final offer of peace, which was a final request: throw down your weapons. And of course, the Spartans responded with molon labe. And in the graphic novel and movie 300, this is also around the time that the Persians threaten, "Our arrows will blot out the sun." And Dionysus, the Spartan, responds, "Good, then we shall fight in the shade." And at this point, the battle began. There would be no reinforcements until the end of the Olympia and the Carnea. They knew that they were on their own for quite some time.
With the Persians both in front of and behind them, the Greek forces at Thermopylae realized for the few and had.
I'm sorry, I skipped one in my excitement. So we got to go back. So there is before this started, a local Phocian had told them that there was one pass, one way around the hot gates, and that is a goat path that the shepherds would use to bring their goats up here to graze. And so we can actually see it. This area here, it's very narrow. And so not Themistocles the Athenian, but Leonidas the Spartan stationed 1,000 Phocians, the local soldiers, up top here, and they were to guard the path. The path. But it was thought that no one would find out about this, or at least it was hoped. A big concern every time that the Greeks were united was that Greeks would sell out other Greeks. They were extremely fractious and divided.
The Persians seemed poised to be held at Thermopylae indefinitely, until an inhabitant, Persian contingent.
I skipped ahead. I'm sorry. This is
Thus,
what happens when I have done this tour several times before. I definitely thought I had stopped here, but I guess not. This is where I need to pick up.
Xerxes believed that at the sight of his massive army, the Greeks at Thermopylae would flee in terror. Instead, they deliberated. The majority of the Peloponnesians wanted to engage the Persians on the Isthmus of Corinth. Leonidas, meanwhile, believed it was wiser to stay put in Thermopylae. While the Greek forces debated, a Persian horseman was sent to spy on the enemy. He returned to Xerxes with surprising news. Not only were the Greeks not fleeing, but the Spartans guarding the fort were exercising and combing their hair. A far cry from the fearful soldiers Xerxes expected. To increase the pressure on the Greeks, Xerxes waited 4 more days, then attacked on the 5th. The Persians faced heavy resistance and suffered many losses, and Herodotus says Xerxes leaped 3 times from his chair, seized with fear for his army. The following day proved to be just as difficult for the Persian forces, and the Greeks continued to stand their ground.
So having done this tour twice already, I'm pretty sure we already did that. I'm so sorry. But yeah, we totally did. And so somehow I feel like I've skipped one. But so the first wave were the Medes. The Medes are a people who are related to or close to the Persians in Central Asia, and they were butchered. They got very little success. Between the waves of the Persian armies, archers would fire, which also had very little effect against these heavily armored hoplites. Remember, these guys are going to be all next to each other with a big shield. And then, yeah, the Greek soldiers would also switch out. So we can't think that there are 300 Spartans holding the pass for three days. Instead, they are constantly switching out. If you have to think of like a 20+ pound shield, a 10+ pound spear that is, your life depends on you killing other people with it, you're going to get tired very quickly. By the end of the first day, the immortals, right, the 10,000 best trained soldiers of Xerxes' army were led against the Greeks to little avail as well. They're called the immortals because there are 10,000, and they have 10,000 retainers or people in training waiting to take any position of someone who falls. So day 2 goes much the same way, and the Persians make little to no headway.
The Persians seemed poised to be held at Thermopylae indefinitely, until an inhabitant from the region came forward with information. He told the Persians of another route, which could take them around Thermopylae. A Persian contingent was sent to verify the information. While there were Greek soldiers stationed to guard the route, they were forced to flee from the Persians. Thus, on the 3rd day of the battle, the Greeks were surrounded by their enemy.
So this guy Ephialtes, a local shepherd, sells him out. Ephialtes is the modern Greek word for nightmare. I like to think that that's how the Greeks got their modern word for nightmare, but it's just as likely that this guy's name is unknown and the word nightmare was transposed back onto him. So Demaratus was a Persian king who exiled himself to Persia, and he did not actually exile himself. He was exiled because the other king, Sparta has 2 kings, Cleomenes had what we would call a robust or muscular foreign policy and was wide-ranging all over the place. And Demaratus was much more conservative, a regular Spartan king who wanted to stay back home and keep the peace. And he kept trying to veto Cleomenes. And so Cleomenes bribed the Oracle of Delphi, which he later paid a great price for, to have the Oracle say that Demaratus was illegitimate, and thus he was exiled and found his way to the court of the Persian king. When Xerxes' forces were still in Asia Minor, the Persian king asked Demaratus if the Greeks would dare resist his massive army. To Xerxes' surprise, Demaratus told him that while Greece was a poor country, it was just, wise, and courageous. He also commented that the Spartans specifically would never flee and fight until they died. Upon hearing this, Xerxes erupted into laughter. However, Demaratus' words would be proven true at Thermopylae. So the Phocians, who were guarding the pass up here, are startled in the middle of the night as Hydarnes and his 10,000 immortals are led by Ephialtes around this path, this goatish path up here. They are caught with their pants down, kind of literally, and so they're trying to get their armor on. They flee to the high ground, and the immortals don't care. They just go right past him, and they alert a person who runs around and lets Leonidas know that he will be surrounded. So the goat path kind of goes all the way back here, and the immortals have to come up this road. So as they are up on this top ground, Leonidas is alerted to this and sends all of his Greek allies away, except for the Thebans, who he suspects of being traitors, and I believe the Thespians, along with the Helot slaves, stay with the Spartan 300 to hold the pass, while the rest, the several thousand more hoplites, are able to escape and not be killed. Right? Leonidas is like, we don't need you to die. We need you to live to fight another day. We will hold the pass. And this is where the famous 300 come from. They are the ones who are willing to lay down their lives in knowing they will die. So Xerxes then sends essentially cannon fodder at them, storms of arrows, and the Spartans fight down. At first their spears shatter, their swords that they then draw splinter. They are down to their daggers, and then their hands, their nails, and their teeth.
With the Persians both in front of and behind them, the Greek forces at Thermopylae realized they had two choices: flee to live another day, or stand and fight till their last breath. Most of the Greeks chose the former option, but some stayed, including Leonidas and his 300 Spartans. For the Spartans, dying a glorious death was one of the highest honors they could achieve. The few members of Leonidas's Spartans who did not participate in the last stand at Thermopylae felt that they had missed an opportunity for honor and either committed suicide or continued living under the mockery and disgust of their fellow citizens. The Spartans' last stand was not only for glory, though. Had they not held off the Persians, the Greeks' retreating forces would probably have been cut down by enemy horsemen.
So yeah, there were two Spartans who they got like an eye sickness or disease. They couldn't see anything. One of them, they were both sent away. One of them refused and stayed, and basically had a Helot bring him into the battle where he was killed along with everyone else. The other one left with the other Greeks, made his way back to Sparta, and was mocked mercilessly. People would not talk to him. They called him the Trembler, and it was the worst type of public shaming. And he later he died in battle a year later at the Battle of Plataea, the final battle of the war, where he showed tremendous courage. He wanted to reclaim his honor. While the fighting went on at Thermopylae, a Greek fleet held off more Persians in a naval battle north of Euboea. That's at Artemision, as I mentioned beforehand. The fleet used small boats to maintain a connection with the land forces at Thermopylae. The battle started out in the Greeks' favor, but mostly because a violent storm destroyed a large number of the Persian ships. However, after hearing news of the defeat at Thermopylae, the Greek fleet withdrew to Attica. So that was off here in Artemision, and then the Attic fleet in the middle of the night, as soon as they hear that Leonidas has died that day, then they sail under dark. They set a number of fires, so the Persians think they're still camped out here, but then they get on their boats and they sail down the gulf between Euboea and the mainland.
On the morning of the third day, King Xerxes was assured of his victory. However, that victory did not come easy. King Leonidas himself fell in battle, and a furious fight broke out around his body. The Spartans fought to the last man, and when they had all been slain, Leonidas's body was brought before Xerxes. According to Herodotus, Persians usually honored the most courageous warriors, even if they were enemies. However, Xerxes was so consumed by rage at the Spartans' resistance that instead he cut off Leonidas's head and ordered it impaled on a stake. A statue of a lion was later erected on the hill of the Spartans' last stand in honor of Leonidas's bravery.
So Leonidas is like lion-hearted. It's Leo is Latin, but I also think it's a Greek root as well. One of these split these split boots. The Greeks would often consult the oracle at Delphi before major events. The oracle's prophecies were usually written afterwards in verse, although it's extremely unlikely she actually spoke them in such a manner when delivering them. Right? She's just huffing vapors and speaking in tongues and blah blah blah. And given that she's the Pythia, in where the body of Python laid eventually laid to rest, she's probably speaking in Parseltongue. Regardless, the following is what the oracle is said to have told the Spartans on the eve of the Persian invasion. For you inhabitants of wide-wayed Sparta, either your great and glorious city must be wasted by Persian men, or if not that, then the bound of Lacedaemon must mourn a dead king from Heracles' line. So, as I mentioned before, it was said king of Sparta must die, or Sparta would be destroyed. The quote suggests the Spartans believed Leonidas' death saved their city. So all of these people fighting there, especially the Spartans, are going to be very aware of the Iliad, right? This is their national poem. And so the fight over corpses in the Iliad was reenacted here with the fight over Leonidas' body. He falls in the middle of the combat, and the Persians and the Greeks are fighting for control of it. Eventually, all of the Greeks die. Leonidas' body is desecrated, the head decapitated, and stuck on a spike.
Though they were victorious, the Battle of Thermopylae shook the morale of the Persian army. They had lost thousands of men, while Greek casualties only numbered in the hundreds, and due to the sacrifice of the Spartans, the rest of the Greek army had been able to successfully retreat and regroup. As a result, even as Xerxes set up camp at the foot of Athens' Acropolis, ready to get revenge for his father's humiliating defeat at Marathon, the Persians were more anxious than confident. They were more aware than ever that the Greeks did not fear them and were ready to die defending their land.
Yeah, so while this was a defeat for the Greeks, it was a moral victory for them and a moral defeat for the Persians. Imagine being one of these Persians thrown against a line of Greek soldiers, knowing that everyone before you has died. Imagine what it would look like for this small area to be covered in thousands of corpses of those people who had gone before you, to march over the entrails, the spilled blood and bodies of other people. Even if you survived to fight another day, you are going to be terrified of the Greeks who did that, who only a few thousand of them were able to hold off an army that stretched across this entire plain. It's going to be absolutely devastating, whereas the Greeks are going to know, oh wow, the Persians need really good odds to try and defeat us. So here we have an amphora with this Greek soldier. He's got the underhand spear thrust against a Persian. It looks like he might be wearing leopard skin, so he might be one of the African soldiers from, say, Ethiopia. For the Greeks, Thermopylae was a defeat, but it was a loss that inspired hope. Persian propaganda proclaimed that the Greeks were doomed to be enslaved and killed. However, Thermopylae showed the Greeks that with clever tactics, well-trained troops, and high morale, the Persians could be beaten despite their numerical superiority. And now the way lies open. Once the pass is taken, Xerxes is able to march his army down here. Earlier tonight, I unsuccessfully streamed a tour of Focus, this area where the Oracle of Delphi would protect their shrine. So the Persians send a contingent of soldiers to capture all of the loot at Delphi. And the Delphians are terrified of this, and they know the army is coming, and they ask the oracle there, what should we do? And the oracle responds, don't worry, the god's going to protect his own sanctuary. This is the most holy place in Greece. You think that he's just going to let some barbarians come and take it? And supposedly, as the Persians were ascending the mountain, lightning struck the top of Mount Parnassus and sent boulders tumbling into the army. Now, if that happened, count me a believer in the Greek pantheon, because that's just about the most miraculous thing ever.
In the end, the Battle of Thermopylae was still a loss for the Greeks. However, the battle gave the Greeks a boost in morale that carried them all the way to their decisive victory over the Persians in the Battle of Plataea in 479 BCE. With the war against the Persians finally won, the Greeks were able to honor the sacrifice of Leonidas and his Spartans with memorials and poems, forever solidifying the glory of Sparta's military prowess. The newfound respect for Sparta was noteworthy, because before the war, the city was seen as no more than a bully who forced itself into the affairs of others. Thermopylae changed the opinions of Sparta for the better, and gave them a legitimate claim to be one of Greece's most powerful and influential cities.
Yeah, Sparta had, before this, they had enslaved their neighbors, they had bullied everyone else. And by bully, I mean like conquered them into submission and forced a Spartan subjugation of the Peloponnese. So everyone was essentially allied with Sparta because they were so powerful. But now they've got the very first historian writing about their great deeds, and they come down to us as this powerful, glorious state. The reason, we still have uh, political, not even political, sorry, like sports teams named after the Spartans, and they still exist in our common memory because of this battle and the first history ever written by Herodotus. After the Battle of Thermopylae, a monumental stele was placed on the ground where the Spartans were buried. According to Herodotus, the stele featured the following inscription: Go tell the Spartans passerby that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. The inscription served to remind passing visitors of the Spartans' heroic sacrifice, and that the Spartan law, their ultimate master, was what they had died to defend, and their freedom that they
You've
treasured
finished.
so much.
I hope you understand the magnitude of the sacrifices made at Thermopylae. Without them, the Greek people would have surely ended as a footnote in Persian history.
Ooh, I like him better
Is there
with his
something else you'd like to
helmet
do?
on. That guy's kind of ugly. All right, let's do a quiz.
If you
I've already
think
done
you're
one of these.
ready, let's
I
begin.
wonder if they give me different
First
questions.
question. Who was Xerxes' father?
All right. We have Darius. Cyrus was the founder of the Persian Empire. Artaxerxes, I believe, was Xerxes' son. And Alcibiades is an Athenian playboy during the Peloponnesian War.
Yes. One of the main reasons Xerxes invaded Greece was to get revenge for Darius' defeat at the Battle of Marathon. Another question for you. Which battle is seen as the final victory against Xerxes' Persian forces?
Aha. So these questions are like very specific and they want you to pay attention to the whole thing. This is crazy. But yeah, so it's the Battle of Plataea, Battle of Thermopylae is where we're at. Battle of Marathon is the first Persian invasion in 490. The Battle of Salamis is the naval engagement that's coming up after the Battle of Thermopylae. I do wish Ubisoft, if you're watching, you're probably not. Hit me up. I got better questions for you. I promise. I can make this. I could help you out. The last battle is the Battle of Plataea.
Correct. The Battle of Plataea helped put an end to Xerxes' invasion. One last question. How many Spartans fought at the Battle of Thermopylae?
Classic. This was the first time I played this on stream. This was the first question I ever got wrong. Because I misclicked and I said 30. And instead it is, of course,
Yes.
300.
300 of us stood against Xerxes' forces.
Obviously misclicked.
You've done well, visitor.
Don't hold it
I
against
have
me.
no more questions for you.
All right. That's going to be it. If you were here,
Farewell,
thank you so
visitor.
much. If not, I hope you enjoyed the recording. I'm probably only going to be streaming on Twitch from now on because the multi-stream option has failed me every single time I've tried it. Anyway, let's go Hellas, and I will see most of you tomorrow in class for our version of the Battle of Thermopylae on Roll20. Bring your dice. It's going to be fun.